So I would like to attend to those. So first of all, Zagrosian Villager has said, if you have any more questions, of course, you can send them in on Entropy or on Odyssey. What is your guest's opinion on the Ukraine war? What does he think the end game is?
Wonderful question. Thank you for asking. Prior to the Ukraine war in 1997, Alexander Dugin wrote a book called The Foundation of Geopolitics. And he tried to say that Ukraine didn't really exist as a nation. This was in conformity with an earlier belief system set up by Ivan Ilyin, who was involved with the Nazis and was an anti-Bolshevik who wanted to create a Christian authoritarian state. And he very much said that the Ukrainians were a Russian people, that they had no individual identity. And he wanted to ensure that the Ukrainians would always be held under the Russian Empire. Contrary to that, you had Stepan Bandera, who was a Ukrainian. He was a Ukrainian Nazi. He fought for the Nazis. And very tellingly, the Nazis imprisoned him and persecuted him and slaughtered the Ukrainian people when they moved into Ukraine, despite the fact that the Ukrainians had welcomed them as liberators against the Bolsheviks, which is further clear evidence that Hitler was in bed with Stalin. So we have this conception that the Rus derived from Kiev. They were originally the Swedish Vikings, what's the term, the Vasingians or something, Vikings, and that they are one unified people. But those Vikings came into conflict with the Turkish Khazars, who had converted to Judaism either in 620 or 740. It is disputed. And they led a vast Turkish empire among many Turkish empires, the Huns, the Magyars, the Seljuk Turks, and later the Ottoman Turks. They took over Crimea. Later, the Golden Horde came through. These Crimean Tartars took millions of European children and women as sex slaves. They engaged in a sex slave trade. The Russians opposed that. The Russians took over Crimea, and the Rus deposed the Khazars and took over southern Ukraine, which was part of the Khazarian Empire, which went all the way over, up and over the Black Sea, and all the way down into the Caucasus between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And so there was this ancient Jewish, not ancient, medieval Jewish hostility between the Khazars and the Rus. The Jews want to reclaim that territory as Jewish territory. That was made clear by a man named Igor Berkut, who published a book called Brat, which means brothers in Russian, in 2009, where he proposed the idea that several regions of Ukraine above Crimea and to the west of Donbass would become a, quote, heavenly Jerusalem, and that the Jewish people would then take over that land, and that land would become a fortress which would buttress Israel and enable the Jews to take over all of Europe again and reestablish the Soviet Union, and that he proposed that the Russians should take over Crimea and Donbass, and this was in 2009. That is obviously what is occurring. They are creating this war between the Leviathan and the Behemoth, which Alexander Dugin proposed as this bipolar war, which is complete conformity with Kabbalah. Dugin is an expert on Kabbalah. This also involves the reestablishment of the Soviet Union. Putin himself said that the dissolution of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe in history. There was a man named Anatoly Golitsyn, who was a KGB defector, who wrote a book called New Lies for Old in the 1980s, and later a book called The Perestroika Deception. He said that the fall of the Soviet Union was imminent and that it would be faked in conformity with Vladimir Lenin's policy, the New Economic Policy, or NEP, in which they would fake the fall of Bolshevism so that they could gain access to the resources of the West, infiltrate the West, divide the West against itself, gain all the knowledge, technology, and wealth of the West, and then wage war of conquest on the West. Anatoly Golitsyn predicted all of this. It has unfolded exactly as Anatoly Golitsyn predicted. He predicted both the fall of the Soviet Union and then its reconquest. This reconquest took several stages, both sides of which were implemented by Jewish forces in the Color Revolution, which we had the Rose Revolution in Georgia, which then created the pretext for Putin to move in. He also created this dialectic among Chechens, where he would lead a pro-Russian Chechen force under the Kaidarovs to wage war against the terrorist Chechens. Prior to the Sochi Olympics in 2014.
Just to sum up, what is the end game of the Ukraine war?
The end game of the Ukraine war is to decimate the Ukrainian population, kill off the breeding age males, chase the children and females into Russia and Poland and Western Europe, so that Ukraine, which was historically an anti-Semitic hotbed, the Cholmoniki massacres in the 1640s killed 60,000 or more Jews. They've always hated the Ukrainians. They had Chernobyl to wipe out and destroy the genetics of the Ukrainians. In World War II, they had both Hitler and Stalin decimate the Ukrainians. They are repeating that process. They want to establish a Jewish homeland in Ukraine as the heavenly Jerusalem. They want to unite the Ukrainians with the Turks. Ukraine is a military ally of Azerbaijan, which is a pan-Turkish empire rich in oil. They want to control all those oil routes from the Caspian Sea, oil of Baku, through Turkey and Israel. They want to gain access to that natural gas. And they want to have the Russians as a guardian force, buttressing it on the east in Donbass and the south on Crimea. And they want to gain control of that food production.